Hello classy people, this is Josh the Top Hat Gamer, and this week I'm reviewing Tom Clancy's The Division. Since the reveal of The Division back at E3 2013, Ubisoft have released a number of games, and let's be honest, a bunch of these have been mediocre at best. So where on the scale of Ubisoft quality does The Division sit? Let's find out. The Division is set in New York, specifically Manhattan, after a deadly smallpox pandemic sweeps through the city during the Black Friday sales. This virus, commonly referred to as the dollar flu, is spread via the handling of banknotes and causes widespread chaos, forcing authorities to place Manhattan under quarantine. You control a newly activated sleeper agent within the titular division, and it's up to you and your allies to bring Manhattan back under control, while finding some sort of clue regarding a cure to the dollar flu. The premise of a city being put on lockdown after a Black Friday-based epidemic is a unique jumping-off point for the game to tell an interesting narrative, but for the most part, this isn't capitalized on. Sure, there are some interesting things going on, like the distrust the community feels towards the Division, but this concept isn't really explored, and the enemy groups you're up against feel bland when they don't have an interesting figurehead to flesh them out a bit. Additionally, as this is an MMO of sorts, no matter how well you do, you'll never see the effects of your exploits on the world as a whole. You took down the Cleaners leader? So what? The Cleaners are still around and as fire crazy as usual. Your actions have no weight and they feel like they don't really matter. Luckily, the game's visuals have a little more going for them. Sure, we've all seen New York City in video games before, but the Division's depiction of the Big Apple is effective in its dreary hopelessness, with Christmas decorations still hanging along desolate, lonely streets. The game's soundtrack during moments of downtime is fairly minimal, adding to the feeling of loneliness that the streets already emanate. But when the action picks up, fast-pumping synth tracks flow alongside the satisfying sound of gunfire to create some pretty intense standoffs. These intense combat sections are the main focus of the Division's gameplay. In fact, aside from the constant loot sorting, cover-based combat is practically all that the Division has to offer. Luckily, this aspect of the gameplay is satisfying to say the least. Like many Tom Clancy games, the combat requires some tactical cover-to-cover movement to outmaneuver enemy units, and doing so has a nice weight to it. It's also really rewarding to outflank your opponents and just lay into them with well-placed shots. The shooting mechanics are mixed up a little bit with various enemy groups and types to take on, but this variety is a little more than cosmetic. The Cleaners, an insane bunch of ex-sanitation workers, roam the streets wielding flamethrowers, while the escaped prisoners known as the Rikers equip themselves with a mishmash of various law enforcement armor and weapons. Finally, the Last Man Battalion are closer to a PMC group than a gang of criminals, utilizing high-tech gear not unlike that which the Division use themselves. Unfortunately, most of these groups, despite appearing varied, all fall back on the same tactics: rush down the player with melee and short-range weapons and flank with everyone else. Despite the odd decision to have these groups act very similarly, the moment-to-moment gameplay is still mostly satisfying. The so-so variety in enemies is not the only issue with the Division's combat, however. The weapons on offer feel relatively limited, as you're given access to light machine guns, marksman rifles, shotguns, and assault rifles, with each class of weapon featuring very little variety within it. A big part of the game is focused on grabbing loot and upgrading your gear, which is satisfying for some people, but just makes the limited weapons on offer feel more obvious than anything. Also, just a quick aside, in a game about regaining control of a city from groups of criminals and looters, it feels somewhat hypocritical to be gunning these people down and then taking their loot. On top of that, the mission structure just feels really repetitive. Every main story mission basically puts you through 2 or 3 shooting arenas, then tasks you to defend a final area and or beat a boss to complete it. With so few main story missions, this lack of variety is front and center. There is a bunch of side content to take on as well, and at the very least they offer some variety to the standard gameplay loop. Gathering and uploading data about the virus, saving hostages, and defending supplies against waves of attackers are just a few of the activities that help to break up the proceedings. At the very least, The Division feels more complete at launch than the other notable next-gen MMO shooter, Destiny. Despite my gripes, there are a few positive things to take away from The Division. Upgrading your base is about the only tangible sense of progression you get, and seeing all the upgrades and gaining access to new skills is rewarding to say the least. Plus, the skills they unlock are the coolest thing about the game, like sticky bombs, portable turrets, and sentry mines. Additionally, unlike Destiny version 1, The Division allows you to create online parties of 4 players. You know, the standard party size that most games will accommodate for. On top of that, the PvP Dark Zone is an interesting approach to multiplayer, as it doesn't force player-on-player combat, but will facilitate it if one agent decides to go rogue. With that said, I didn't really find much reason to go into the Dark Zone aside from some better loot drops. But at the end of the day, I'm pretty unfazed by The Division. Its premise was interesting, but it failed to capitalize on it with an interesting narrative. Its core gameplay loop is fun despite its severe repetition, and though there is a tangible sense of progression, so much of it is tied to the game's loot system, which honestly doesn't appeal to me. To its credit, The Division feels more complete at time of launch than, say, Destiny, but I find myself unenthusiastic to play it. And whenever I could muster up some enthusiasm, the game's servers were down. Tom Clancy's The Division gets the Top Hat Gamer rating of mediocre. I tried my best to get into this game and give it an honest try, but I constantly found myself bored by its lack of narrative incentive and the repetitive mission loops. There is potential here, but as it stands at launch, The Division is just not that entertaining. If you're dying for a new cover-based shooter you can play with friends, then The Division will meet your needs, but I can't say it's much more than okay. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the review informative. If you missed the last review on Far Cry Primal, click the annotation. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna shoot guys in their fire packs. Fight fire with fire.